Alright, here we go. Before the fire, of course, you got to learn how to make things. Slab building techniques. I am Professor Stephen Robinson. This demonstration, we're going to talk about leather hard slabs. So this is a piece from the Haniwa culture in Japan, and all of this is really more hard-edged kind of ways of working. So cheese hard or leather hard is stiff but flexible clay. It's been used all around the world for larger or smaller pieces. Here's some larger coffin or sarcophagi from Greece. This sarcophagus is fairly large, and it's thicker slabs than you might be working with on a smaller piece. This is a small brush box from China, and this is porcelain. This is another porcelain slab built box from China, Jingdezhen area. This piece is from Limoges in France. These are tulip vases. These are actually low fire, they're not porcelain. And this one in particular looks like it has about 8 or 9 pieces to make the one tulip vase. Each one of those is separate to hold water. This is a writing set from Meissen area. So it would hold ink and water and then have pens and quills. Now, of course, there's so many historical pieces that you can find, that you can see examples of leather hard. This is Anne Currier. She's a contemporary artist, and I feel like she's one of the most amazing hand builders using leather and loose slabs, but usually leather. This is a piece of Vince Patelka's, and it's colored clay slabs that he's made, so the actual color is slabs that he's formed first. This is Bill Griffith's piece. Again, like the curvature on that top slab, it needed to be somewhat flexible, right? This is one of Pete Pennell's jars, just an exquisite piece, and all these different elements you can think about sculpturally. Here's one of his teapots. And you notice the handles on the last one, and the handle on this, the knob, the spout, all of that you can think of as separate little elements. This is a David Shaner piece in my collection, and it's really thick slabs, but it is hollow also. These are a side angle of Carrie Esser's work. These pieces have different slabs laying in there. It could be slip slabs too. Here's another one. This is Chuck Hines. It's a very large shield, and he takes slabs and lays them into plywood forms. And here's some of my work. I made these in collaboration with Kathleen Guss. We did extensive surface work to these pieces. They're about 2.5 feet tall. Here's another one. This is about 1 foot in height. And you can see how the lids come off of these. These are some recent ones I did by myself with students as demonstrations last quarter. So the simple idea of like how a box is put together. In this particular diagram, it shows like a takeout box. So you think about all the different little elements. Of course, you can fold the clay also, but you could cut each one of those pieces and put that takeout box together, but in clay. So the idea around templates and thinking about building it first, Anne Currier used templates quite extensively to build her pieces before she would even touch the clay. So I believe that templates are a great way to work. They are not the only way, but I'm just going to expose you to the ideas around the simplicity of a template. This one actually seems kind of complicated. There's a lot of parts to make. The simplicity of using templates. This is just a cardboard template that I can use for 5 walls or 6 walls or 4 walls or 3 walls of a form this big, and then I could either build another form on top of that, throw a form, put it on there. So just a way to like basically think about how a box is made up of so many different sides if you want them all the same. I could use this one for 2 sides, and then I could use longer ones for the other 2 sides, and I could have a rectangular form. So you have to think about how your templates work. And one thing I suggest is, anything you can put together with paper and the curvature of paper, you can get, obviously you can bend clay, cardstock, or or stiff material like cardboard, anything you can put together, you can use duct tape to loosely fit it together. You can get an idea of what you're doing. You can build a scale model that you can then take apart and use all those pieces to transform it into clay pieces that you put together to create that same form. So any scale, and then thinking about how elements might work together and how you put things together again in cardboard will then tell you how they may look. Then in clay, of course, the clay you're going to be able to manipulate quite a bit more than cardboard. In its plastic state, the variety of things that you'd be able to do to it is where you can take it from that model to an individual piece. So how you get into it with leather hard slabs, if you want them to stay stiff, it depends how hard you want them. Also like to say cheese hard. You really want to make sure that your clay is not crumbly. You want to be able to score it and have it still be wet enough. So be careful of it not being so dry. So when I say cheese, it's not going to be good, white, sharp cheddar where it's crumbly. But the curvature of a leather hard slab, you can curve it to some degree. But I'm just going to talk about like a basic box as though I was building it out of cardboard. So I've got these slabs here up to that point where they're at a pretty stiff consistency, and keeping them at that consistency during the process. So if it's taking me a while, if I have a lot of pieces, then I'm certainly going to keep some of those pieces covered in plastic while I'm working on others. Like this is the lid, or the top of the form. And so I wanted to make sure that was covered up, and this is the bottom of the form, and those will be the last things I'm going to be putting on. So I'm going to make 4 walls. What I've done is I've rolled out the slabs. For this piece, little around 1/4 of an inch thick. And one of the keys is, again, things dry from the edges, and so I don't want to cut out the exact shape that I want right away. I want to cut out a shape that's about 1/2 inch or so. I don't want to be too wasteful with the clay, have to reclaim all that clay, but I want to cut out a shape that's around 1/2 inch or so larger than the form. Okay, with this template, I've got 2 options. I can cut exactly where the template is like this. Cut off that excess clay again so I have a fresh piece of clay and real fresh edge on that piece of clay. Or I can think about actually cutting a 45-degree angle off of that template so I have the sides coming together in such a manner that they have more surface area to connect is one of the keys. But what I do, instead of cutting this edge and this edge where I'm going to attach the next piece to, instead of cutting that on a 45-degree angle, you can take a board that's already cut on a 45, and of course it depends on if you're having 4 sides, and a 45-degree angle is what you're looking for to have these match up and be a box, right? You have to look at angles depending on the geometry of the piece. But if I had a piece of wood cut at a 45, I could lay it on here and slide that knife across that and get an exact 45. Well, I don't do that. I actually take it and I just score it on an angle. You can see that on this edge here. So I'm going to do that to all 4 sides of this box. So on each side, I'm not going to do the bottom or the top this way, although you can do that. So I'm going to get a 45 on all the sides, and then I'll slip it and I'll put it together. And one thing you got to look out is all of this stuff when you're scoring is winding up here, and if you have a nice smooth surface as I do with this slab, I don't want to lay it down on there. So that's one of those precautions you have to take. If you're looking for that 45, if you have one of these scoring ribs like this, you actually lay this part down flush. This area here is going to give you a pretty good angle for that too, instead of eyeballing it. So that's one of the things that you can look at, is like if you're actually laying that flush, you're getting this kind of 45-degree angle right here. Alright, now I'm going to slip them all and then fit them together. Alright, I've got all 4 sides here slipped and put together, and you see how the slip is squishing out of all those seams, so I've been pretty liberal with it. I'm going to go back and reduce some of that slip and then start using pressure this way and this way on each seam to close up those seams and fix them further. And then the next step would be to be adding a small coil to reinforce those 4 seams. What I do for the seams sometimes is paddle them down, and this is the pressure that I could get with my fingers, but may manipulate that clay too much. And with this paddle I can then sled up and sled across and kind of get close to finishing it if I want a really tight seam there. So a real tight, rigid seam can also then be honed up slightly more by taking a fettling knife or a smooth rib and really honing up that edge if you really want a sharp edge there. Okay, I've refined all the joints now, and now my next step before putting the bottom and the top on this form is to roll out a coil about 1/16 of an inch, not too large, just enough to add a gusset in here to reinforce this seam. Okay, I'm working on this last seam. I'm going to lay this coil in, and I start down at the bottom after I lay it in there. I've scored a little in there and slip, and I'm using just my finger pressure to kind of bounce it into that corner slightly, and I kind of pinch off this part, and it's just kind of worked in there a little now. So I start back at the bottom, work my way up. On larger pieces this is pretty important. On smaller pieces it's not really a necessity, and so it depends on what you're doing, but it really is beneficial to reinforce that seam. If you're going to spend a lot of time on that piece, you don't want it to actually have a crack. Now I'm going to work on the bottom here and score that and put a slab on the bottom and do a similar thing with the coils. Okay, this seam on the bottom is the last one I can actually work with a coil until I cut the lid off. If I was using this form just as a form under another form, then that top seam would be difficult to get a coil on. Okay, one thing that I like to do is to score, really liberally score, and slip this area here. And then how do I know where to score here? I don't want to score this whole area. I could measure it out and score exactly where it's going to meet up. Or what I like is the outline that this slip is going to make on here. So I'm going to put that down on there. I'm not going to press too hard, but that's going to then be something I can lift up, try and keep it in that curve, and you can see here where it's shown kind of an outline where I'm going to score and slip this slab. Once it's on there, there's a couple ways to play with that. Of course, just manipulation with your hands, but you can use the paddle all the way around there and work that area. And I've left that extra a bit hanging around here. Before I cut it, I'm gonna work that down with some pressure. And having finished everything off pretty much to the point where I want it, I'm gonna have to put a hole in it somewhere as it starts to dry a little. And of course this is just a box, so what do you do with it then? I'm thinking about all the varieties of ways you could of course cut it off right here evenly all the way around and add a flange to the interior, so a slab of clay that might be attached to the lid or to the body, and then seat up inside the lid or vice versa. Or a puzzle lid, thinking about the way you cut it off, very much like a pumpkin, it fits back together. Or just as a box with another form. Now if you're working sculpturally, internal structure might be worked into it too for a variety of reasons, depending on the weight on top of it or the scale of the object too. Okay, of course thinking about additive and subtractive techniques that you can employ on the surface or into the piece, sculpturally or for utilitarian reasons. Almost done. I'll show you a few finished pieces in the greenware state. This box form is finished, and it's more in that puzzle lid format, so the forms that are on the surface of it actually then fit together as fingers would into a glove. You can see some close-ups of it here, and there's actually some forms working inside of the forms too. This one here is from that same template again. So one thing about templates is very much like molds, just utilizing a template and making the same thing over and over, of course, is pretty boring. So you can work a variety of different things from that same mold or that same template, but still within that same format. Alright, in this demonstration, I made medium-sized pieces so you could really see what I'm actually doing on the inside and the details. For you to start off learning this technique, stay fairly small is my suggestion. Make sure you follow the measurements I've put in your assignment sheet and grading rubric. So now it's your time to just go ahead and, again, just dive into it.